Hi guys, Mrs. Milam here to read section 3, chapters 9 through 13 of Because of Winn Dixie. So grab your copy so you can follow along with me. Chapter 9. Just about everything that happened to me that summer happened because of Winn Dixie. For instance, without him, I would have never met Gloria Dump. He was the one who introduced us. What happened was this. I was riding my bike home from Gertrude's Pets, and Winn Dixie was running along beside me. We went past Dunlap and Stevie Dewberry's house, and when Dunlap and Stevie saw me, they got on their bikes and started following me. They wouldn't ride with me. They just rode behind me and whispered things that I couldn't hear. Neither one of them had any hair on his head because their mamas shaved their heads every week during the summer because of the one time that Dunlap got fleas in his hair from their cat, Sadie. And now they look like two identical bald-headed babies, even though they weren't twins. Dunlap was 10 years old like me, and Stevie was 9 and tall for his age. "I can hear you," I hollered back at them. "I can hear what you're saying," but I couldn't. Winn Dixie started to race away ahead of me. "You better watch out," Dunlap hollered. "That dog is headed right for the witch's house." "Winn Dixie," I called, but he kept on going faster and hopped a gate and went into the most overgrown jungle of a yard that I had ever seen. "You better go get your dog out of there," Dunlap said. "The witch will eat that dog," Stevie said. "Shut up," I told him. I got off my bike and went up to the gate and hollered, "Winn Dixie, you better come out of there." But he didn't. "She's probably eating him right now," Stevie said. He and Dunlap were standing beside me. "She eats dogs all the time." "Get lost, you bald-headed babies," I said. "Hey," said Dunlap, "that ain't a very nice way for a preacher's daughter to talk." He and Stevie backed up a little. I stood there and thought for a minute. I finally decided that I was more afraid of losing Winn Dixie than I was of having to deal with a dog-eating witch, so I went through the gate and into the yard. "That witch is going to eat the dog for dinner and you for dessert," Stevie said. "We'll tell the preacher what happened to you," Dunlap shouted after me. By then, I was deep in the jungle. There was every kind of thing growing everywhere. There were flowers and vegetables and trees and vines. "Winn Dixie," I said. "Hee hee hee," I heard. "This dog sure likes to eat." I went around a really big tree all covered in moss, and there was Winn Dixie. He was eating something right out of that witch's hand. She looked up at me. "This dog sure likes peanut butter," she said. "You can always trust a dog that likes peanut butter." She was old, with crinkly brown skin. She had on a big floppy hat with flowers all over it, and she didn't have any teeth, but she didn't look like a witch. She looked nice, and Winn Dixie liked her. I could tell. "I'm sorry he got in your garden," I said. "You ain't got to be sorry," she said. "I enjoy a little company." "My name's Opal," I told her. "My name's Gloria Dump," she said. "Ain't that a terrible last name? Dump." "My last name is Baloney," I said. "Sometimes the kids at school back home in Watley called me lunch meat." "Ha!" Gloria Dump laughed. "What about this dog? What do you call him?" "Winn Dixie," I said. Winn Dixie thumped his tail on the ground. He tried smiling, but it was hard with his mouth all full of peanut butter. "Winn Dixie," Gloria Dump said. "You mean like the grocery store?" "Yes, ma'am," I said. "Woo-wee," she said. "That takes the strange name prize, don't it?" "Yes, ma'am," I said. "I was just fixing to make myself a peanut butter sandwich," she said. "You want one too?" "All right," I said. "Yes, please." "Go on and sit down," she said, pointing at a lawn chair with the back all busted out of it. "But sit down careful." I sat down careful, and Gloria Dump made me a peanut butter sandwich on white bread. Then she made one for herself and put her false teeth in to eat it. When she was done, she said to me, "You know, my eyes ain't too good at all. I can't see nothing but the general shape of things, so I got to rely on my heart. Why don't you go on and tell me everything about yourself so as I can see you with my heart?" And because Winn Dixie was looking up at her like she was the best thing he'd ever seen, and because the peanut butter sandwich had been so good, and because I'd been waiting for a long time to tell some person everything about me, I did. Chapter 10. I told Gloria Dump everything. I told her how me and the preacher had just moved to Naomi and how I had to leave all my friends behind. I told her about my mama leaving, and I listed out the 10 things that I knew about her. And I explained that here in Naomi, I missed my mama more than I ever had back in Watley. I told her about the preacher being like a turtle, hiding all the time inside his shell. I told her about finding Winn Dixie in the produce department and how, because of him, I became friends with Miss Franny Block and got a job working for a man named Otis at Gertrude's Pets and got invited to Sweetie Pie Thomas's birthday party. I even told Gloria Dump how Dunlap and Stevie Dewberry called her a witch. But I told her they were stupid, mean, bald-headed boys, and I didn't believe them, not for anyhow. And the whole time I was talking, Gloria Dump was listening. She was holding her head and smiling and frowning and saying, and is that right? I could feel her listening with all her heart, and it felt good. You know what? She'd said when I was all done. What? Could be you got more of your mama in you than just red hair and freckles and running fast. Really? I said. Like what? Like maybe you got her green thumb. The two of us could plant something and see how it grows. Test your thumb out. Okay, I said. What Gloria Dump picked for me to grow was a tree, or she said it was a tree. To me, it looked more like a plant. She had me dig a hole for it and put it in the ground and pat the dirt in tight, like it was a baby and I was tucking it into bed. What kind of tree is it? I asked Gloria Dump. It's a wait-and-see tree, she said. What's that mean? It means you gotta wait for it to grow up before you know what it is. Can I come back to see it tomorrow, I asked. Child, she said, as long as this is my garden, you're welcome in it. But that tree ain't going to have changed much by tomorrow. But I want to see you too, I said. Said Gloria Dump. I ain't going nowhere. I'll be right here. I woke Winn Dixie up then. He had peanut butter in his whiskers and he kept yawning and stretching. He licked Gloria Dump's hand before we left, and I thanked her. That night, when the preacher was tucking me into bed, I told him how I got a job at Gertrude's Pets, and I told him all about making friends with Miss Franny Block and getting invited to Sweetie Pie's party, and I told him about meeting Gloria Dump. Winn Dixie lay on the floor waiting for the preacher to leave so he could hop up on the bed like he always did. When I was done talking, the preacher kissed me goodnight, and then he leaned way over and gave Winn Dixie a kiss too, right on top of his head. You can go ahead and get up there now, he said to Winn Dixie. Winn Dixie looked at the preacher. He didn't smile at him, but he opened his mouth wide like he was laughing, like the preacher had just told him the funniest joke in the world. And this is what amazed me most. The preacher laughed back. Winn Dixie hopped up on the bed, and the preacher got up and turned out the light. I leaned over and kissed Winn Dixie, too, right on the nose, but he didn't notice. He was already asleep and snoring. Chapter 11. That night, there was a real bad thunderstorm. But what woke me wasn't the thunder and lightning. It was Winn Dixie, whining and butting his head against my bedroom door. Winn Dixie, I said, what are you doing? He didn't pay any attention to me. He just kept beating his head against the door and whining and whimpering. And when I got out of bed and went over and put my hand on his head, he was shaking and trembling so hard that it scared me. I knelt down and wrapped my arms around him, and he didn't turn and look at me or smile or sneeze or wag his tail or do any normal kind of Winn Dixie thing. He just kept beating his head against the door and crying and shaking. You want the door open? I said. Huh? Is that what you want? I stood up and opened the door, and Winn Dixie flew through it like something big and ugly and mean was chasing him. Winn Dixie, I hissed. Come back here. I didn't want him going and waking the preacher up, but it was too late. Winn Dixie was already at the other end of the trailer in the preacher's room. I could tell because there was a spring sound that must have come from Winn Dixie jumping up on the bed. And then there was a sound from the preacher like he was real surprised. But none of it lasted long because Winn Dixie came tearing back out of the preacher's room, panting and running like crazy. I tried to grab him, but he was going too fast. Opal, said the preacher. He was standing at the door to his bedroom with his hair all kind of wild on top of his head, and he was looking around like he wasn't sure what was going on. Opal, what's going on? I don't know, I told him. But just then there was a huge crack of thunder, one so loud that it shook the whole trailer, and Winn Dixie came shooting back out of my room and went running right past me, and I screamed, "Daddy, watch out!" But the preacher was still confused. He just stood there, and Winn Dixie came barreling right toward him like he was a bowling ball, and the preacher was the only pin left standing, and wham! They both fell to the ground. "Uh-oh," I said. "Opal," said the preacher. He was lying on his stomach, and Winn Dixie was sitting on top of him, panting and whining. "Yes, sir," I said. "Opal," the preacher said again. "Yes, sir," I said louder. "Do you know what a pathological fear is?" "No, sir," I told him. The preacher raised a hand. He rubbed his nose. "Well," he said after a minute, "it's a fear that goes way beyond normal fears. It's a fear you can't be talked out of or reasoned out of." Just then there was another crack of thunder, and Winn Dixie rose straight up in the air like somebody had poked him with something hot. Then he hit the floor. He started running. He ran back to my bedroom, and I didn't even try to catch him. I just got out of his way. The preacher lay there on the ground, rubbing his nose. Finally, he sat up. He said, "Opal, I believe Winn Dixie has a pathological fear of thunderstorms." And just when he finished his sentence, here came Winn Dixie again, running to save his life. I got the preacher up off the floor and out of the way just in time. There didn't seem to be a thing we could do for Winn Dixie to make him feel better, so we just sat there and watched him run back and forth, all terrorized and panting. And every time there was another crack of thunder, Winn Dixie acted all over again like it was surely the end of the world. "The storm won't last long," the preacher told me, "and when it's over, the real Winn Dixie will come back." After a while, the storm did end. The rain stopped, and there wasn't any more lightning, and finally, the last rumble of thunder went away, and Winn Dixie quit running back and forth and came over to where me and the preacher were sitting and cocked his head like he was saying, "What in the world are you two doing out of bed in the middle of the night?" And then he crept up on the couch with us in this funny way he has, where he gets on the couch an inch at a time, kind of sliding himself onto it, looking off in different directions, like it's all happening by accident. Like he doesn't intend to get on the couch, but all of a sudden, there he is. And so the three of us sat there. I rubbed Winn Dixie's head and scratched him behind the ears the way he likes. And the preacher said, "There are an awful lot of thunderstorms in Florida in the summertime." "Yes, sir," I said. I was afraid that maybe he would say we couldn't keep a dog who went crazy with pathological fear every time there was a crack of thunder. "We'll have to keep an eye on him," the preacher said. He put his arm around Winn Dixie. "We'll have to make sure he doesn't get out during a storm. He might run away. We have to make sure we keep him safe." "Yes, sir," I said again. All of a sudden, it was hard for me to talk. I loved the preacher so much. I loved him because he loved Winn Dixie. I loved him because he was going to forgive Winn Dixie for being afraid. But most of all, I loved him for putting his arm around Winn Dixie like that, like he was already trying to keep him safe. Chapter 12. Me and Winn Dixie got to Gertrude's Pets so early for my first day of work that the close sign was still on the window. But when I pushed on the door, it swung open, and so we went on inside. I was about to call out to Otis that we were there, but then I heard music. It was the prettiest music I'd ever heard in my life. I looked around to see where it was coming from, and that's when I noticed that all the animals were out of their cages. There were rabbits and hamsters and gerbils and mice and birds and lizards and snakes, and they were all just sitting there on the floor like they'd turned to stone. And Otis was standing in the middle of them. He was playing a guitar, and he had on skinny, pointy-toed cowboy boots, and he was tapping them while he was playing the music. His eyes were closed, and he was smiling. Winn Dixie got a dreamy kind of look on his face. He smiled really hard at Otis, and then he sneezed, and then his whiskers went all fuzzy, and then he sighed and kind of dropped to the floor with all the other animals. Just then, Gertrude caught sight of Winn Dixie. "Dog!" she croaked, and flew over and landed on his head. Otis looked up at me. He stopped playing his guitar and the spell was broken. The rabbits started hopping and the birds started flying and the lizards started leaping and the snakes started slithering and Winn Dixie started barking and chasing everything that was moving. And Otis shouted, "Help me!" For what seemed like a long time, me and Otis ran around trying to catch mice and gerbils and hamsters and snakes and lizards. We kept on bumping into each other and tripping over the animals, and Gertrude kept screaming, "Dog! Dog!" Every time I caught something, I put it in the first cage I saw. I didn't care if it was the right cage or not. I just put it in and slammed the door. And the whole time I was chasing things, I was thinking that Otis must be some kind of snake charmer, the way he could play his guitar and make all the animals turn to stone. And then I thought, this is silly. I shouted over Winn Dixie barking and Gertrude yelling. I said, "Play some more music, Otis." He looked at me for a minute. Then he started playing his guitar, and in just a few seconds, everything was quiet. Winn Dixie was lying on the floor, blinking his eyes and smiling to himself and sneezing every now and then. And the mice and the gerbils and the rabbits and lizards and snakes that we hadn't caught yet got quiet and sat still. And I picked them up one by one and put them back in their cages. When I was all done, Otis stopped playing. He looked down at his boots. "I was just playing them some music. It makes them happy." "Yes, sir," I said. "Did they escape from their cages?" "No," Otis said. "I take them out. I feel sorry for them being locked up all the time. I know what it's like to be locked up." "You do?" I said. "I've been in jail," Otis said. He looked up at me real quick and then looked back down at his boots. "You have?" I said. "Never mind," said Otis. "Aren't you here to sweep the floor?" "Yes, sir," I told him. He walked over to the counter and started digging through a pile of things, and finally he came up with a broom. "Here," he said, "you should start sweeping." Only he must have gotten confused. He was holding out his guitar to me instead of the broom. "With your guitar?" I said. He blushed and handed me the broom, and I started to work. I'm a good sweeper. I swept the whole store and then dusted some of the shelves. The whole time I worked, Winn Dixie followed me and Gertrude followed him, flying behind him and sitting on his head and his back and croaking real quiet to herself, "Dog, dog." When I was done, Otis thanked me. I left Gertrude's pets thinking about how the preacher probably wouldn't like it very much that I was working for a criminal. Sweetie Pie Thomas was waiting for me right out front. "I seen that," she said. She stood there and sucked on her knuckle and stared at me. "Seen what?" I said. "I seen all those animals out of their cages and keep 'em real still. Is that man magic?" she asked. "Kind of," I told her. She hugged Winn Dixie around the neck. "Just like this grocery store dog, right?" "Right," I said. I started walking, and Sweetie Pie took her knuckle out of her mouth and put her hand in mine. "Are you coming to my birthday party?" she asked. "I surely am," I told her. "The theme is pink," she said. "I know it," I told her. "I gotta go," she said all of a sudden. "I gotta go home and tell my mama about what I seen. I live right down there in that yellow house. That's my mama on the porch. You see her? She's waving at you." I waved at the woman on the porch, and she waved back, and I watched Sweetie Pie run off to tell her mama about Otis being a magic man. It made me think about my mama, and how I wanted to tell her the story about Otis charming all the animals. I was collecting stories for her. I would also tell her about Miss Franny and the bear, and about meeting Gloria Dump and believing for just a minute that she was a witch. I had a feeling that these were the kind of stories my mama would like, the kind that would make her laugh out loud, the way the preacher said she liked to laugh. Chapter 13. Me and Winn Dixie got into a daily routine where we would leave the trailer early in the morning and get down to Gertrude's Pets in time to hear Otis play his guitar music for the animals. Sometimes Sweetie Pie snuck in for the concert too. She sat on the floor and wrapped her arms around Winn Dixie and rocked him back and forth like he was a big old teddy bear. And then when the music was over, she would walk around trying to pick out which pet she wanted. But she always gave up and went home, because the only thing she really wanted was a dog like Winn Dixie. After she was gone, I would sweep and clean up and even arrange some of Otis's shelves, because he did not have an eye for arranging things, and I did. And when I was done, Otis would write down my time in a notebook that he had marked on the outside, 1 red leather collar, 1 red leather leash. And the whole time, he did not in any way ever act like a criminal. After working at Gertrude's Pets, me and Winn Dixie would go over to the Herman W. Block Memorial Library and talk to Miss Franny Block and listen to her tell us a story. But my favorite place to be that summer was in Gloria Dump's yard. And I figured it was Winn Dixie's favorite place to be too, because when we got up to the last block before her house, Winn Dixie would break away from my bike and start running for all he was worth, heading for Gloria Dump's backyard and his spoonful of peanut butter. Excuse me, I gotta get a drink. Sometimes Dunlap and Stevie Dewberry would follow me. They would holler, "There goes the preacher's daughter, visiting the witch." "She's not a witch," I told them. And it made me mad the way they wouldn't listen to me and kept on believing whatever they wanted to believe about Gloria Dump. One time Stevie said to me, "My mama says you shouldn't be spending all your time cooped up in the pet shop and at the library sitting around talking with old ladies. She said you should get out in the fresh air and play with kids your own age. That's what my mama said." "Oh, lay off her," Dunlap said to Stevie. Then he turned to me. "He don't mean it," he said. But I was already mad. I shouted at Stevie, "I don't care what your mama says. She's not my mama, so she can't tell me what to do." "I'm going to tell my mama you said that," shouted Stevie, "and she'll tell your daddy and he'll shame you in front of the whole church. And that pet shop man is retarded and he was in jail and I wonder if your daddy knows that." "Otis is not retarded," I said, "and my daddy knows he was in jail. That was a lie." But I didn't care. "And you can go ahead and tell on me if you want, you big bald-headed baby." I swear, it about wore me out yelling at Dunlap and Stevie Dewberry every day. By the time I got to Gloria Dump's yard, I felt like a soldier who'd been fighting a hard battle. Gloria would make me a peanut butter sandwich straight off, and then she would pour me a cup of coffee with half coffee and half milk, and that would refresh me. "Why don't you play with them boys?" Gloria asked me. "Because they're ignorant," I told her. "They still think you're a witch. Doesn't matter how many times I tell them you're not." "I think they're just trying to make friends with you in a roundabout way," Gloria said. "I don't want to be their friend," I said. "Might be fun having them two boys for friends." "I'd rather talk with you," I said. "They're stupid and mean, and they're boys." Gloria would shake her head and sigh, and she would ask me what was going on in the world and did I have any stories to tell her, and I always did.